This is one of the Psalms, along with other passages, where some people just kind of avoid. As I'm sure you figured out by now, that's not me. Some of the hard stuff we're just going to tackle. We're going to hit it and do the best we can. And I think it's caused very weak Christians to avoid the difficult things in the Bible. And I think that we're seeing results of that with broken families, broken society, struggling churches, and so forth. I think it's important that we strive to deal with the hard stuff and the things that may be a little bit difficult or even uncomfortable for us. And this is kind of one of those particular psalms. That's okay. Have you heard of the word imprecatory? An imprecatory psalm, imprecatory prayer. There's different types of prayer. There's intercessory, for example, a prayer of thanksgiving, praise, worship. The idea of an imprecatory psalm or prayer is words or prayers that invoke evil, curses, or divine judgment upon another, okay? A prayer to bring the evil down. It's kind of like we may pray, "Oh Lord, destroy the evil." That's the idea of this word, imprecatory, okay? So a psalm, by the way, this particular psalm, Psalm 137, is a psalm that would have been penned, or at least is a psalm in reference to the time of the Babylonian captivity, okay? Now, it might have been, a little bit after, or it might have been penned during the exact time. There's a little bit of a, question and debate on exactly who this particular writer of this psalm is, and especially because of the timing, if it was penned during the days of the Babylonian captivity. But anyhow, let's go ahead and read it. I'm going to just kind of break it down. We'll look at verses 1 through 4. We'll see the misery of the exiles, or the tears of exile while they were in captivity. And you can see certainly the discouragement, the distress that they were in. Look at verse 1, Psalm 137, verse 1. I won't keep us very long. This is not a very long psalm, and I've just got just some simple little points here that I'll bring out, and we won't spend a great deal of time on this. But by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. And so as you can see here, you might hear this referred to as tears of exile, or a time of misery for the exiles, weeping, crying, bringing forth tears. You can just imagine they were taken captive, literally taken from their homeland, taken from Zion. Do you remember who the leader of the Babylonians were when they came in? Nebuchadnezzar, right? And Habakkuk, you remember in the days of Habakkuk, God had a dialogue with, Habakkuk had a dialogue with God, and God to Habakkuk, and they kind of went back and forth. And, God says, "I've had it, I'm done." And he says, "I'm going to bring the Chaldees." This would be the what we know as the Babylonians, this same group of people. "And I'm going to use them to bring judgment upon my people." And Habakkuk was troubled with that, because he said, essentially what he says to God, he kind of, it really... I think sometimes we say, well, he was arguing with God. I think he was just wrestling with it. I think he was trying to figure it out. I think as a man, I don't understand it. What it was is he said, "Lord, they're worse than we are." And it didn't make sense. Why would you use the Chaldees or the Babylonians to judge your people? Because as bad as we are, they're even worse. And what God say? He said, "I know it. Don't worry about it, Habakkuk, because I'm going to judge them too." God can use anybody at any time that He wants to. And He says, "I'm going to use the Babylonians, an evil people, to bring judgment on my people. And then because of what they done to my people, I'm going to judge them in turn." And so God has the power and ability to move nations. He did then, I believe He does even now, and I believe He will in the prophecy of the Revelation, we see that He will move nations. We saw some of this as a few weeks ago. What was it, a month or two, whenever it was, we kind of spent a few weeks on Ezekiel 38. That's God is going to move those nations, talking about putting the hooks in their jaws. Even it appears that even though they really don't want to come after Israel, or at least in part at that time, they're going to when the time is right, because God is going to make them. It's going to happen. In other words, God is going to move that, and it's going to happen. And then eventually He's the one. All of that is to declare His glory, and He's going to eventually put an end to it. Well, here with Babylon, God used Babylon. Babylon was evil. They were just flat evil and oppressive. There was so much destruction that they brought into the world. They wanted to conquer the world. They wanted to destroy. It seemed like anything civilized, anything good. They wanted it all to be as evil and so forth, and like them. And you think about that Tower of Babel, and you think about the empire of Babylon. And then you think about the Babylon that we see, the spirit of Babylon, that evil. It's almost like this word is synonymous with evil, is what I'm saying. Everywhere you look, confusion, distortion, babbling, it just seems to be closely connected to evil. So here we see this particular psalmist, he is at the rivers of Babylon. So he is in Babylon. He is there as a captive, as an exile in Babylon. And, he's just enjoying life and says, well, I'm so glad to be here, and isn't this great? And you know what? No, that's not the case. He is in tears. He says, we sat down, we wept. They're homesick. You could just imagine, this is your home, and to be taken many miles, across the east, the pilgrimage, and to take into a foreign land, and to be there, you could just imagine they were homesick. They wanted to return to their homeland. They were in a place of exile, not only, just the unknowns, the being uncertain about many things. And what is it? Someone say, well, they didn't deserve it. Actually, it was no accident. And I alluded to this just a moment ago. It was no accident that the Babylonians came and took them captive. It was because of their idolatry. It was a judgment. Listen, even Israel, America, or any other nation, you cannot bow down to false gods and worship idols, and sooner, it's going to catch up with any people, period. God is not going to tolerate that forever. He's not just going to put up with it forever, and that's essentially why He brought the Babylonians to Israel and took them, or Judah, and took them captive, was because of their idolatry, because they had bowed to false gods, bowing to idols. And so now they are in captive, they're regretting it, they're discouraged, and we read on in verse 2, we hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. When you think of the willow, I always think of the weeping willow. I think of the one that's just drooping and sagging and so forth, and I think that's the picture here. And we hanged our harps. Why would you hang the harp up? Because the song is out of your heart, in other words. When there's no song, there's no need for instrument. That's the picture here. We're just going to put our harps up because the song that was in our heart, it has left us. It is gone. Why is that? Because they're in a place of discouragement, in a place of despair and depression, you might say. In verse 3, for there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth. And myrrh, we think of with bitterness, mourning, weeping, a time of mourning, mirth. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. But what's amazing is, in their hearts, they're in bitter and misery. but yet they wanted song. The Babylonians, they wanted song. They wanted mirth. They wanted joy. Oh, sorry, wake you up. They wanted happiness. They wanted them to put on a show, but their heart was far removed from it, okay? Their heart was not in it. This wasn't where they wanted to be. They didn't want to, it's just kind of like, I got to say this, but I wonder if the world ever looks at God's people in a similar, it's joy to the world, the Lord. If I sing joy to the world that way, y'all wouldn't think too much of it, would you? You think, man, that's a hypocrite, right? Listen, if we're going to sing victory in Jesus, we ought to live like there's victory in Jesus. It's kind of like, this is a frustrating, I get so frustrated, I'll be honest with you. Listen, they're asked to put on a show. I am against just putting on a show. Walking around like this all the time. Everything, yeah, I'm good, how are you? I just broke my leg and had a flat tire, but I'm good, Listen, it's okay to hurt sometimes. There's a time for mourning, a time for this, and time for laughter, and so forth. And so what I'm saying, let's be real. Don't pretend. Don't just put on a show. But at the same time, in our heart of hearts, when there is victory in your heart, it's going to come forth. Okay? And so I think there is a continual problem when we try to worship the Lord, but yet there is no appearance of victory. There's a problem with that. It's like saying, well, oh, victory in Jesus, I sure hope I make it through another day. You see the problem with that? Yeah. Rather than saying, okay, I'm ready for the week to whatever I have to face, I'm ready to go because I have victory in Jesus, all right? And too many times we treat life as if we're going to try to find the victory. I hope I win the battles and so the war. Listen, rather than going and facing the battles because you know and have confidence that the war is already won. It's already won in victory. And so, here they are. They're saying the enemy, the Babylonians, they're wanting us to sing. But we've already hung our harps up because there's no song in our heart. There's no song there. And listen, it's okay. Sometimes, we have a song in our heart, but sometimes when you have moments when you're serious and there's things that hit you, you know that sometimes you have a song in your heart and you rejoice. There's been times in our lives when the song is just not there, okay? And I think, this is like trying to put a song there and force something whenever there's an issue, there's a problem. These people, they needed to repent before God. They needed to, think about this. They needed to admit to God, we were wrong. We worshiped idols. Hello? We're in this situation, and our song has left us and gone out of our heart because of a problem. And that problem was that we bowed to other gods. We weren't true and faithful to you. Isn't it true that sometimes we find ourselves in a situation here's what I'm saying. We said, boy, them evil old Babylonians, and they were. But those evil old Babylonians were here and took the people captive because the people of God had forsaken him. They had forsaken him, all right? And this was certainly a judgment that was brought to them. Okay, so, all right, we read on here, he says in verse 4, so, verses 2 and 3. In other words, here's the picture. Because we're in this situation, because we're in this captivity, we have not a song in our heart. We've hung our harps up on the willow. Why? Because we're in captivity. We're in despair. We're in a place of discouragement. But then our captives, the Babylonians, they require us to sing. They require us to put on, mirth, to rejoice, and so forth, to put on a smile. He says in verse 4, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And so you can see the despair that they're in. They're in a situation here. You could just imagine being Can you imagine being taken into Babylonian captivity? That, you say, well, there's no way I could sing. I mean, we can relate, even though we're not in that situation, we can get it, okay? It doesn't take a whole lot of thought to say, that you get it. If you were in Babylonian captivity, you'd probably say, I tell you what, I just don't feel like singing. I don't feel like singing. And even though they're requiring us to, there is no song. Look at us. We are in a strange land. We are in a foreign land. And then in verse 5, we see that, don't forget your roots. The wakened memory of the exiles. Look in verse 5. He says, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. So the psalmist at the same time, he says, don't ever let me forget my roots. Don't ever let me forget my raising, my home, where I came from. Even in a situation, and I want to make this kind of applicable here for us, not just a history lesson of captivity, but whenever you find yourself in a situation, go home. Even though they weren't able to return home yet, physically, mentally, there was something that the psalmist, he says, don't ever let me forget my home. Don't ever let me forget. And I thought about this, and I was thinking, sometimes there's situations where the song, not because of captivity and so forth, but there may be times when the song is just not in our heart, when because of a situation, a scenario. And I think there's a good application for us. What do we do in a situation like that? You run to a hill called Calvary just as quick as you can. You get your mind there stayed on the Lord. You look to the cross of Calvary. You look to what He has done. And even in times of despair, and even, might I say, even in times where we may get ourselves in that situation, what do we need to do? We need to return to Christ. We need to return to Calvary, put our mind and our focus upon Him. Everything points us to Christ. And I think even this passage right here, he says, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. And so he says, don't forget the vows of remembrance. The psalmist says, may I never forget Jerusalem. May I never forget. Here I am all these miles away, taken captive in a place called Babylon, a foreign land. I don't feel like singing. But he says, let my right hand forget her cunning. It's kind of like saying this, my right hand would be better for it to be put away than for me to forget my homeland. And what does that mean? Well, the things he was taught, the true God, Yahweh, and the things of Yahweh, the things of God. He says in verse 6, if I do not remember thee, O Jerusalem, if I don't remember my home, if I don't remember Jerusalem, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I can't remember my home, if I can't remember Jerusalem and Zion, he says I'd be better off to not even be able to speak at all. Okay, I'd be better to say nothing, that my tongue would cleave to the roof of my mouth. And I was thinking about that too, and I thought, kind of like, what was it on Bambi when who was it? Was it Thumper's mom said, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all? You remember that? Well, I was thinking about if we can't talk about Calvary, maybe we ought not talk at all. Sometimes it's just that simple. Sometimes, I'd be better off to just be silent than to speak and ramble on about things other than the Lord Jesus Christ and the finished work of Calvary and what He's done for me. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy, above all other things, all right? Verse 7, remember, O Lord, the children of Edom. Edom was another name for the people of the descendants of Esau. In the day of Jerusalem, who said, now race it even to the foundation thereof. And so I was trying to think, Esau and Jacob, sorry. Whew. Y'all always remember exactly what you're going to say, right? Well, it just slipped my mind. You had twins, and they were named Jacob and Esau. And Jacob was actually the second born to Esau, the descendants of Edom, this people. And there was this great struggle that was there, and this conflict that was raging continuously. And and he's talking about here a prayer of judgment that will be brought. Now he brings us verse 8, O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy or blessed shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be, and this is kind of the last few words is what a lot of people have trouble with. It's somewhat controversial, but I'm going to read it and talk about it. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. Not in any way, shape, or form is the Bible, is God himself talking about that it's okay for the shedding of innocent blood. That's not at all what the case is here. What you have here is the psalmist, remember this word I mentioned earlier, imprecatory, okay? That is a big, I know that word, it's not one we use all the time, but remember what I was talking about, destroying the evil. Well, this wording here, what he's talking about, is just like with reference back to Edom, Esau, the twin to Israel. Edom despised, okay? There was a vicious attitude. Edom despised Jacob, okay? And you have, there were violent words and so forth, but then you have violent atrocities of Babylon. A little bit of a comparison and contrast here. Let them know, what is the psalmist saying? Let me help you with verse 9. Essentially what the psalmist is saying here is he's saying, let Babylon know the very evil that they have brought on others. And furthermore, to a point that they have been so evil that it would be better off those that were to slay the young ones of the Babylonians. What he's saying is they would be more blessed to do that than for those young ones to grow up and be like the adult Babylonians. Why? Because they were absolutely evil. And I know that may be hard for some, but that's what he's saying. And I'm going to tell you something. It's unfortunate that even the thought of these children growing up in such a vile, cruel, wicked environment, to the point to where the psalmist is even saying and uttering these words, that in his heart of hearts you can see the distress, you can see the anguish, and he's saying it would be better off for this than for them to grow up and be like the Babylonians that we're dealing with right now. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Yeah. Pretty bad. And I tell you what, I just, I take that thought and I think about, how blessed we are. We are so blessed to grow up in the kind of environment that we do, and that our nation, the nation we're in, to have families that love the Lord and so forth, and for a nation to become so wicked, so evil and vile to where such words as this could be uttered it's hard for us to imagine. But I'll tell you what, you just cannot explain evil. Sometimes you just can't explain it. Evil is evil, and evil does as evil is. And so you have a prayer here, basically. I like what Nelson said, Thomas Nelson there. He says, a prayer that no new Babylonian generation will arise seeking worldwide dominion through cruel oppression. And that's basically what this is all about. And so, all right. It just reminds us to be thankful for what we have and our upbringing, and may we be careful to pass that on to the next generation. All right? Okay. That's all I have, and I'm just going to stop there, so let's all stand and we'll be dismissed.